Quarantine, self-isolation, lockdown, happy hour, joining us early morning from Bangkok. I got him out of bed, not even a comb to his mane. Welcome for joining this morning.
Thank you, Stefan, and I am premiering my quarantine haircut.
Oh, fantastic. Let's go right in. People know you're Counting Countries interviews. What's your interview style? How do you deal with a pain in the ass guest?
How do I deal with the pain in the ass guest? Yeah, so that can be a challenge. And I think the biggest challenge, I think, in terms of working with a guest might be twofold. One, a guest that doesn't answer the question, and two, a guest who might speak not for a minute, but might speak for 5 or 10 minutes answering the question. And in general, both of those factors lead to a poor interview output. So one, I have a write-up which I send to every guest before the interview with my best tips. Hopefully they read that. Before the interview, we speak before we go live. And again, I encourage them to keep their answers brief and on target. And three, if they can't follow that regimen, at times I have to interrupt the podcast and plead or cajole or encourage them, again, to either answer the question or keep the answer short.
There's a certain core of questions that you ask every guest, and then there's plenty of custom follow-ons on that. Which one is the hardest to get people to answer to your satisfaction or expectation?
Well, I think the one everybody at some level has the biggest challenge, and I know what they're going to say before they even answer the question, is what is your favorite place in the world? And obviously, we all know as people who are in the 193 community, there's not one single place. And even though I warn them that this question is coming, there's some challenges and frustrations here. I usually ask for one.
They redefine it however they want, right?
Yeah. And so, that quickly can become 5 places or 10 places. But, I understand their passion because I feel the same way.
You also ask every guest what counts as a visit. At NEPS, we've tried to retire those descriptions, but you've heard every possible reasoning and rationalization, sometimes to justify people's past trips, sometimes to just pure creativity and fun. I love that answer. What have you learned about what counts for a visit? Not your definition, but what have you learned about the human ingenuity for a visit?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've learned is everything counts depending on who you're speaking to. And since there's no universal governing board that regulates the 193 community, everybody feels comfortable at defining their own rules. So, of course, on one end of the spectrum, I mean, we have the obvious candidates for North Korea, which we see quite often, where you go to the JSA Parmesan Village and you simply walk to the other side of the conference room. Last year, I think several times we saw people finishing off their quest in the Golan Heights for Syria. And then maybe I'll go to someone on the extreme. We'll use Thor Peterson of Once Upon a Saga, who has some really, really defined rules, which have made his journey near impossible. And his are obviously no airplanes, never going home until the quest is finished. And the real tough one is spending a minimum of 24 hours in each country. And this journey has taken him nearly 7 years and he's not finished. So that 24-hour rule can make it quite tough.
And he is sitting where right now?
He is closing in on 90 days in Hong Kong. He was supposed to be there 4 days as he switched from one container ship to the other container ship as he's trying to finish up the Pacific Islands. Due to COVID, that 4 days is now stretched close to 90 days with, I'm scared to say, possibly no immediate end in sight.
And I'll share his blog and the links. I've been enjoying the Hong Kong post. That's why I teed it up. I love Hong Kong, and it's actually we were there in January and cut our trip short. But seeing his perspective as he's been an unwitting expat. Speaking of that visit, I see Justine joined in the session. I remember she had a great one of, I think, locating a guest house that, according to at least Google Maps, is within the bounds of Vatican, although outside of the Vatican wall by some little curve of the map. So there's one thing. There's always a different way to come up with that 24 hours or the overnight, and I love the ingenuity that I hear on some of those. So you are at 143 interrupted. Is that my understanding? And you pulled yourself out of a big West Africa road trip that you had planned in March.
Yeah, 142. I wish it was 142. Yeah, so March 8th, I began a month-plus road trip covering 6 West African countries, Senegal down to Liberia. I started in Senegal, had a great trip in Senegal. On, I think, March 15th, I drove from Senegal into Gambia, spent one night on the beach in Gambia, and at dinner, I was traveling with 2 other EPSers. I'll give them a shout out, Craig Thompson and Phil Marcus. We had our group dinner and we read the writing on the wall. And that was a Sunday night. After dinner, we all bought tickets, and Monday morning, we flew really reluctantly out of Gambia to get back home. So yeah, this awesome road trip I'd been planning for a year really ended prematurely.
Well, let's at least all benefit by the planning. I think you had taken a perhaps slightly less ambitious but similar region trip in 2018, and so you had the learnings from that. And for those that would be planning their first multi-country West Africa trip, what did you do for 2020 that you learned from 2018?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, for West Africa, obviously you need patience and calmness, whether it's dealing with a border official or the roads. It's best to be calm and collected versus getting all frustrated and angry. And, I had it relatively easy. I'm working with one car and one driver over a region. So these 6-country trips were with one driver. I'm not doing bush taxis. That's a world of difference. So relatively easy, or easier than I thought it was going to be.
And talk about some of the highlights of West Africa that you've had. I hear you talk a lot about Burkina Faso, which is one that maybe gets overlooked as a landlocked spot.
Yeah, so I've been there twice. First time was more on the Waga side. So I guess the highlights there, you can go south to Tibli to see the Painted Village. And I think everybody has their selfie at the, Mer de Croc, or Lake of Crocodiles. So that's a traditional cultural place for a lot of natives to go, and you can go sit on the sacred and holy crocodiles and get your photo taken. Probably not the smartest thing. My second trip to Burkina Faso was based in the west around Bobo, and I think it's a little bit more richer on that side. Bobo, the big city there in the west, you get the Mud Mosque, which is pretty cool to look at. There's a UNESCO World Heritage Site to check out, which I don't recall the name. It's a tough drive over non-existent roads for a couple of hours. And it's basically the remnants of a palace or fortress in the middle of the jungle. And it's one of those UNESCO World Heritage Sites where you are literally the only person. And one other cool highlight for me is I went to the Kingdom of Gan, I think it's Gan, and I had a private audience in the courtyard with the King of Gan. So one of those, only in Burkina Faso type experiences that you're going to have.
Right, and mentioning those long, hard drives, Michael W. is asking, are you doing all the driving? Are you hiring a driver for these trips?
Yeah, so it's good luck. I mean, we all have this network here at every passport stamp, which is extremely beneficial. So a shout out to Rambling Randy. So I read his blog probably in 2017, and he was in Burkina Faso maybe a month before me, and he hooked up with this guy, Marlon Reed. And I called Marlon, and I'm like, Marlon, I want you to take me to Tibli for the day. And he kept on encouraging me. He's like, Rick, you should use me for your full 5 days here. I'm like, no, I'm going to go solo. He kept on pushing me. Thankfully, he did. So I was with Marlon for 5 days in Burkina Faso in 2017. A really, really rich experience, and made the visit so much better is the reality. And then I used Marlon in 2018 when I did the 6 countries, Benin to Mali.
And I believe one of your Counting Countries episodes, you have an introduction with him?
I don't think so, but I'm also keeping myself busy, and I am hosting the Nomad Mania podcast. So I did a full episode with Marlon.
That was it. I know I heard him somewhere. Yep.
Which is, and for those who don't know, the Nomad Mania podcast is basically a 30-minute guide for countries or regions where information is typically not as rich. So I did an episode with Marlon on Burkina Faso.
All right, and I'll put that link in the comments as well. I knew I had heard from him, and it fascinated me. Andy Hicks is asking about the safety. Michael W is following up with the cost of drivers in this region, and Furkan is asking, did you go to Sindhu Peaks or Fabadougou Domes out of Boba?
I don't recognize that second name, the Fabu, but I did go to Sindhu Peaks during my visit to the West. I do have a pretty good blog post on GlobalGaz where I highlight all the places in the West that I went in the country.
Right.
Touching on safety, if you're using the U.S. State Department guide as a benchmark, a lot of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, all that area, that border is, I believe, level 4, do not travel. So yeah, I mean, that area can be quite tough and quite challenging. Obviously, in general, it's a statistical luck of the draw. My visit to Djenné was completely safe, but then, a month later in the Dogon region, which is right near Djenné, 40 Mali soldiers were killed and wiped out. Burkina Faso, last year, you might have noted a European couple who was doing a road trip in Burkina Faso were kidnapped, disappeared, and it was not for at least a year later, they were eventually released, I believe, in Mali. So, like anything, talk to people in every passport stamp to get their intelligence. And even better is if you can get a contact on the ground. Someone like Marlon, he's a good resource, and he obviously knows what's going on in Burkina and that region a lot better than us who parachute in for a week or for a month.
All right, and Cody is asking, hitting you right back with your tough question, your favorite location. And I know Henrik Jeppesen interviewed you a couple years ago on the podcast, so I don't remember your answer then, but favorite location as of today.
Yeah, so as a asterisk to that comment, Henrik Jeppesen did interview me for Counting Countries, but that episode was never published. So that's all. And I do have a go-to answer. So my favorite country in the world, even though it's not really my favorite, is Myanmar or Burma. And the more I go there, the more I love that country. I think I've been there 5 times now. And then actually I was supposed to be there. I was actually supposed to be in Burma right now for another trip. So really frustrating, but I love that country. So Bagan, the temples of Bagan, one of my favorite places in the world. The Schwendigen Pagoda in Yangon, arguably just one of the most fantastical, beautiful things to see. The Chin woman who have the facial tattoos are fascinating. I've been to see them twice. There's another area of Burma, which is a challenging area to visit, and It's called Morocco. It's up by the Bangladesh border.
Mm.
It used to be a former kingdom. And in Morocco, you have some of the most fabulous and beautiful temples, hundreds of them scattered in this rolling landscape. From a visual perspective, the temples of Bagan are more beautiful on the panorama, but the temples of Morocco have some of the most amazing interiors and details that are much, much better than Bagan.
Talk about the food in Myanmar. Michael W. He said the food was something to be desired. I think he said left something to be desired.
I'm actually, I remember, well, number one, I'm not much of a foodie and I'm not adventurous at all. I am very paranoid and scared about eating something weird.
I was going to get to that. You are a picky eater. How do you do it?
So actually, I remember my first visit to Burma was in '04, and I was walking through a wet market up in Bagan, and I was watching this butcher shop in fascination, and this guy's just chopping the meat. It's 100 degrees or 40 centigrade. Flies are everywhere. When the butcher turned around, 3 dogs jumped up on the butcher's table and started licking the table and grabbing all the scraps. And from that point on in Burma, I only ate fried rice. I'm like, my strategy was the less moving parts to my meal, the less chance I'm going to have to get sick. And I was eating fried rice and French fries every lunch and dinner to mitigate and lower my risk. I mean, over time, I've been a little bit more adventurous in Burma. I was up in Mindat in this mountain town. Me and my friend were there for 4 nights. And, and I'm also very repetitive. So I ended up eating the same meal at this hotel for 4 nights in a row, but at least I expanded. It was this awesome, delicious chicken curry that I had at the hotel. So there's definitely some things to eat, part Indian, part Thai, kind of mixed all together.
Yeah, it is such a big, diverse country, the regions, the geography, the peoples. I'm not sure if you've made multiple trips or over the course of what years. He hasn't been for some years, pre-cell phones, no ATMs. I don't know if you've had that sweep of trips to Myanmar to comment on the changes.
Yeah, so my first trip is in '04.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, so that time, I remember SIM cards were selling for several $1,000s back then, and there were no ATM machines. So I have seen that arc of, we'll say pre-tourism or very little tourism. In my last visit, I was there last year, so in 2019. So I've had a 15-year span visiting Burma 5 different times.
What other countries have you had a span like that, a 15-year span where you can really comment on the sweep of changes?
Yeah, my longest span is Armenia. I've been every year since 2003, except for this year because I was supposed to be there April 8th to the 25th, and I sadly missed that trip, and I'm hoping to reschedule that, obviously. So, I would say I've got a pretty good perspective on changes that have taken place in Armenia during that time span.
And one of your visits in Armenia and one of your blog posts is about the Yazidis. Curious about that, what you were able to visit of that community.
Yeah, so for those who've been to Armenia, you might know it's a very homogenous nation with about 90% of the people living there are ethnic Armenians. It might surprise some that the second biggest ethnic group in Armenia is the Yazidi community, who's better known for being in Kurdistan. And then we all like those little travel trivia. The biggest Yazidi church in the world is located in Armenia, which I got to visit last year.
Fantastic. And about some of the events, it seems like I've heard you mention the World Nomad Games so many times. Here it was what's supposed to be in Turkey. Is that what I heard a recent guest say? But talk about that event and those that would be interested in the future. We don't know when, where some of these things will be happening. Let's assume that things become possible again in the next year or so.
Yeah, so I mean, World Nomad Games was in Kyrgyzstan, and I went to the third annual World Nomad Games, which was probably 2 years ago. I thought it was an incredibly cool event. It's set up in the mountains on the lake, and it's a number of traditionally nomadic or Central Asian type sports and cultural events that take place over several days. And it was awesome. I really, really enjoyed myself. That was the first time that I got to see Kok Baru or Buzkashi, the game that people play on horses with a dead goat or dead calf. That's been on my bucket list for a long time. And seeing that event in the competition in the athleticism, that was awesome.
And staying in that region, you've done posts and photography on people in Afghanistan and people in Kyrgyzstan. Talk about your interest there, what you're seeing. You had one called The Surprising People of Afghanistan.
Yeah, so I've been ticking off Central Asia. I only have one country left, Turkmenistan, which I've been denied for my visa twice. So hopefully we'll get that done. This past autumn in November, I was in Afghanistan for 2 weeks. Again, another trip so high on the bucket list, right? I mean, we see Afghanistan in the news every day. Old history, culture, traditions. So I was really looking forward to that trip, and it did not disappoint. 2 weeks was not enough. And obviously, we have our pre-formed expectations or media expectations. And the thing I kind of said before my trip is I thought it was going to be much more of a failed state. But I also say within a couple of hours of arriving in Afghanistan, I was at this lovely restaurant being serenaded by this Afghan musician, eating a great meal next to tables full of women on their cell phones. So it's great to see that despite all of these tragedies and calamities that have befallen on the nation, at least in some parts of the country, life goes on.
And talk about, you've covered all of the highlights, it seems. Now, did you go with an operator? Did you go independently? How did you put together the itinerary and figure out the respective safety for each of the places you went?
Yeah, so going back to counting countries, I get a perspective a lot of times, which is helpful in planning my own travel. And I've interviewed a couple of people who've traveled Afghanistan independently. And Anna from Moscow, for instance, did couch surfing. And Anna, to me, is either incredibly brave or crazy, or probably both of them. I personally would never, ever do couch surfing in Afghanistan. I think there's way too much risk in that. I am not brave or adventurous enough. So to answer your question, I went with Untamed Borders. And the reality is, I didn't want to research the security level and where I was supposed to visit. These guys have been operating there for many, many years. A lot of people know Kozer. He's from the Pashtun ethnic group. He knows the country. He knows the people. He knows the languages. So I put it all in their hands, everything from security to the itinerary.
And talk about working with tour operators. I think you've certainly done more group tours than I have, and I've come through you to appreciate going on. I think you've been on some Young Pioneers tours, which I've not taken one of their tours, but you've talked on different episodes about that. And I realized that my focus on solo travel, I've not met many travelers in the way that you have in some of those. So I've taken a new perspective on group tours that I didn't previously.
Yeah, I've also done 2 YPT tours. So one, in Iran, where I'm not allowed to travel to independently. So I used YPT. And I also went to Eritrea with YPT before the visa situation opened up, and YPT had an angle to get visas on arrival. So YPT made sense for both of those group trips. If I look at my Afghanistan trip, I was one of 7 travelers in that group. And there's pros and cons. I love independent solo travel because I'm selfish. You want to do what you want to do when you do it. But sometimes it makes more sense to do the group trips, like those 3 countries, which I just mentioned. And looking at Afghanistan, my group was so awesome, and it really added to the trip. So as you might imagine, people are going to Afghanistan are kind of veteran travelers. So we obviously have a lot to bond over, i.e. travel. And they were just all great people. And it really, at some level, added to the trip, getting to hang out with them and build friendships over those 2 weeks.
Seems like it could easily go wrong. I remember a few years ago when I was getting to know some of the more established extreme travelers, and in terms of these like Bouvet Island month-long boat rides and that. And I said, oh, it'd be so interesting to get to know these people. And the response was, you'd think that, would you? But it's people are so it can be so intense and so strong-willed. I guess it can be just a crapshoot of how it comes out. It's not like a Thomas Cook tour where people are just taking too long at the gift shop at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. Crapshoot or luck of the draw. I mean, I think statistically, anytime you're on a group tour, there's at least one of those guys on that trip who is difficult and makes you not like group trips. Again, I was lucky with my Afghanistan group, for instance.
I would probably naturally be one of those. So how do you be a good person on a group trip?
That's the catch.
Well, you're an amiable, genteel guy. How do you become a good group trip traveler for these more adventurous, ambitious tours?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious and evident is don't be late. I mean, there's nothing worse when everybody's waiting at 8 a.m. and someone rolls down 30 or 40 minutes late. I mean, that's probably going to be the best piece of advice I can give anybody on a group tour. And then number 2, roll with the punches, be flexible, and realize there are different personalities on the trip with you, and try and be forgiving or accepting.
How about the gorillas? You found a way into DRC that I went to Virunga. I didn't even know about your way in. So talk about what you did, and for people that want a trip, Virunga might be closed for any number of reasons.
Yeah, with that recent tragedy again, I mean, it's brutal what's happened in Virunga. So yeah, I think in DRC you kind of have 2 options for trekking with gorillas. On north, I think it's Lake Goma. On north of the lake is Virunga. At the southern end is Kahuzi. When I was planning my trip to DRC, Virunga Park was closed. So I looked towards Kahuzi. Now, the reality is there's two different types of gorillas. The gorillas up in Virunga are mountain gorillas. The gorillas down in Kahuzi are lowland gorillas. I also saw the mountain gorillas in Uganda. To me, I can't tell the difference. They're both amazing to me. I was trying to find out information on Kahuzi. There was an Ebola outbreak as well as civil unrest. And I was trying to grab as much data and information as possible. Either through Thorntree or TripAdvisor Forum, I found Carlos. Carlos is a German who's been living in Bukavu, the big town near Kahuzi. He's been there for 30 years. He owns the Coco Lodge. So I started communicating with him. He kind of gave me the 411 on the security situation, the health situation, as well as logistics. So he made things pretty smooth for me. I crossed over the border, spent 2 nights or 3 nights at his lodge, and I did trekking in Kahuzi.
Fantastic. And how do you compare it to various other land, air, sea natural encounters?
Yeah, I think I can confidently speak to any of us who've had the great fortune of done gorilla trekking. I mean, that's a top decile animal experience. So I got to do it twice, once up in Uganda for the mountain gorillas and the lowland down in Kahuzi. And to get face to face, eye to eye with those creatures is pretty awesome.
Michael W. is asking more about Bwindi, which you did visit, yeah.
Yeah, Bwindi is the park I went to in Uganda. Stating the obvious, Uganda, welcomes and sees a lot more tourists. The day I went trekking, it was the maximum amount of people at Bwindi. I think it's 80 people split into 10 different groups or 8 different groups. So 10 people a group. DRC, Kahuzi was kind of the opposite. The entire park had 4 people. So if you like less people, consider going to Kahuzi.
I like less people. I like ease. When I went, Veriga was open, and that was the easiest, fastest way in. That just book online, visa on arrival, pay with credit card. It was a smooth process compared to figuring out Rwanda and Uganda and all of that. And of course, I think across the board, all of these have gotten more expensive. But they could get a lot more expensive from what I paid for me to feel like I wouldn't do it. It's one that I'm absolutely glad I spent the money. Let's scoot all the way across the Pacific and land right in the middle. FSM. I have not been to Yap. It's on my high wish list. Talk about Yap. I was surprised that you found more World War II remnants than I would have expected. There's a lot of Pacific islands that have very little left because of the climate and the way things weren't preserved, the manta rays and so much more.
Yeah, so I was really, really fortunate and lucky to visit Yap. Yap is one of the 4 states of the Federated States of Micronesia. It's the furthermost western state and really quite far from the other 3, much closer to Palau. I spent 4 nights there. I mean, I would have been happy with 40 nights there. But 3 reasons I loved Yap. 1, the World War II history and getting to see, the remnants of some of the planes that are still there. 2 is the cultural aspects of Yap. So you get to visit the villages and something called the Men's House, which is their traditional hangout place for the men. And Yap is also really, I think, quite well known for stone money. And this is really fascinating. You go to the Stone Money Bank, which is just really this outdoor area with dozens and dozens of stones. And some of these stones are like 8 feet tall or a couple of meters tall. They're humongous, they're heavy. And number 3, I loved Yap. I'm not a diver, but the snorkeling was so awesome. And also, again, because we're going to these less visited places, some of the days I went out snorkeling, I'm the only guy on the boat. So it's the captain, the guide, and me. So you're in this incredible, beautiful island paradise, and you have the whole ocean to yourself. It's awesome.
And that's one that has gotten even less flight service. I think it was a year and a half ago that United canceled the flight that once a week would go to Manila, and they didn't figure out that all the Filipinos working in Yap weren't allowed to transit Guam to get back home, and they were stuck. And I think they eventually worked it out because the U.S. airports typically do not allow transit passengers without U.S. visas to pass through.
Yeah, and I was really fortunate because when I went, which was 2 or 3 years ago, they also had the direct flight Yap to Palau at that time. Okay. So I went Guam to Yap, spent my 4 nights there, and then took a direct short flight to Palau, and then I flew out of Palau into Manila. So it was that much easier, just a couple of years to get to Yap.
And comment on Palau, also incredible spot.
Yeah, another place. I spent 4 nights there, and I wish it was so much more. I was really stunned by the beauty. I just went out every day. I think it's called Sam's dive shop or whatnot. But, you know, I did 4 snorkeling, kayaking trips, and I went out every day for a full day on the ocean, and just absolutely stunning.
And are you taking underwater photography?
Well, I don't want to call it photography. I do have a GoPro, so I have set that up obviously to do a lot of video and a little bit of photography underwater. So that's been awesome playing with that.
And how about in the sky then? Drones?
So I brought my drone.
With drones.
Yeah, so I bought my drone to both Palau and Yap. Yap was awesome, but Palau was like top 1 percentile. And when I got on the boat, I would pop that drone up, and I mean, just to look at those photos from above on Palau, I mean, just so incredibly awesome.
And those not familiar with Palau, what made it that way?
Well, I mean, there's hundreds or thousands of just, I think they're limestone islands completely covered in green. I mean, they're a lot of them are just really small and tiny. And then you marry that with some of the most crystal clear, beautiful blue ocean, and it's a fantastic combination.
Yeah, it is one of my favorites. And I remember just thinking of one of the snorkeling trips I went, the boat was just going by and the water is so clear. The guy pointed down and he said, Japanese zero. And you could see right down into the water before you were even in. Really an incredible spot. A place with a heck of a lot more tourists, but a hidden gem, Thailand, where you are based part of the year. You called out a place called Surin Islands. I've never heard of it, and that's probably a good thing for tourists wanting to visit. Tell us about
it. Okay. And I'm just looking at the comments, and we were talking about Burkina Faso before, and I couldn't remember the UNESCO heritage site, and someone wrote in the ruins of Loropini, and he went there as well, or she went there as well. So, yeah, back to Thailand. So the skinny part of Thailand, on the west of that is the Andaman Sea. And Andaman Sea has some of those postcard photos of these beautiful islands that we all dream about to visit. One of my favorites is Surin Island, where people can do day trips. I 100% encourage you not to do a day trip, because even though it's sort of off the beaten path, it's really not off the beaten path. And these motorboats are bringing hundreds of people during the day. So the key is to sleep overnight. There's one facility on the island. It's maybe like 4 rooms you can rent, or 40 tents. So, and then there's one cafeteria. So I spent a couple nights on Surin Island. And again, the magic is after 4 p.m. when all the day people have left, it gets a little cooler. You get the sunset, and you get to have the island much more in a solitary manner. So a great place.
It's like the Venice of the Andaman Sea, you're saying?
Well, I'm going to segue here. And while I really do appreciate Surin Island, I found something 10 times better. In the Andaman Sea is shared by Burma and Thailand. So the exact same beautiful islands that you have in the Andaman Sea that are owned by Thailand, you have the exact same in Burma. These islands are truly, arguably untouched. The other year, I went to these Burmese islands for the first time, and that's, for me, that's where the dream really took place. So you can start off in Ranong, Thailand, which again is on the Andaman Sea in the West Side Point, and you can do these day trips from Thailand to these Burmese islands. The same islands that 40 boats go to in Thailand only have 4 boats going to in Burma. But again, you need to take this one step further. You can also sleep over on a couple of these Burmese islands. And that's what you need to do. So Instead of the 4 boats, it then gets down to 1 boat.
And is there any, it's visa on arrival or totally visa free in this?
Yeah. So Burma, I mean, several years ago, you can get the e-visa. It's really straightforward. I think it's give or take $50, and they process it maybe as quickly as a day. So when you leave Renon, the first place you stop is Koh Tang. Koh Tang is a small town in Burma. It's 10-minute boat ride from Renon. So you get off the boat, they stamp your passport, you're done, and you're in Burma. So again, instead of doing that day trip, then I encourage you to take that boat to one of the islands where they have some sleeping facilities. You base yourself on one of those Burmese islands, and then you do the day trips from that Burmese island. But again, when I took the boat from that island and we would go exploring for the day, we'd be the only boat visiting the other islands.
And what are these trips budget-wise, roughly?
You know, all these boat trips for the day are give or take 100. So that's whether you're visiting those Thai islands or the Burmese islands. For sleeping over, and when you sleep in Suriname, that's also relatively cheap. The tents aren't that expensive. I don't know the exact number. Sleeping in the Burmese islands, not a lot of options. There's one island with a real hotel. That island is called Nang Op. I have a pretty in-depth article on my blog about Nang Op. You have 3 options there: a tent, a room, and then a really nice room. Even the tents there are like pretty expensive, like $80 a night, and the rooms go up to $300. So that can get a lot. I mean, it's not for budget travelers on Nang Op.
Okay. And I just found the article. I was trying to guess how on earth to spell that. It's not an area where I know the language, but I have found the article and sharing it in the comments as well. Talk about being based in Thailand. I assumed it was easier, but it sounds like the visa regime is not entirely designed to welcome all of these influencers, creators. What does everybody call themselves? Ninjas and everything else that are part of the stew of your daily expat experience there.
You're not calling yourself a travel ninja, Stefan?
If you need to claim it, then you're probably not. I would say so. I did a nomadic network talk for we've got Erica Vervo here watching last week about what is travel hacking, and I said if the first thing you think of is how to roll your socks or fold your socks, then it's not travel hacking.
Well spoken.
Yeah.
So Thailand. Yeah, I mean, I've been here off and on since 2012, so a fair amount of time. In general, if I had to sum it up, Thailand loves quality tourists. A quality tourist is someone who comes with his whole family, comes for 10 days and spends a lot of money. I don't know how much they love the expat community. And why I say that is so many countries have very, very accommodating visa regimes to encourage long-term expat communities. Thailand really makes it quite challenging and difficult. It makes you jump through a lot of hoops. So in some ways, Thailand is a great place because you get the weather, it's relatively cheap, you have so many great places that you could visit around the region. But in some ways, it's not a great place to be here long-term.
It sounds like they actually did something really nice and with some forethought about all of you that were on the 30-day clock during the current lockdown situation.
Yeah, so as many of you know, when you arrive at the airport, you can, for most passports, you can get 30 days upon arrival. So my Africa trip got canceled due to COVID. I came back on March 17th. Obviously, my visa was running out in 30 days. I was getting ready to go to the immigration office where I can extend it for 30 days, but I wasn't looking forward because I saw the photos online and there were literally thousands of people queued up at the immigration office. And obviously, there's no social distancing, it's not safe. Thailand recently passed a law giving all foreigners until July 31st without any penalties to be able to stay in their country. So I want to massive thanks and kudos to the Thai government for taking in the safety of all of the foreigners here as well as their own immigration officials.
And let's talk a bit about how you arrange your year. I think there's some echoes with Chris Sutherland, another EPS moderator that we interviewed on Friday, that I understand you spend up to about half a year traveling, and then the rest of the year focused on your business in Thailand, Boston, and Chicago, if I've got it right.
Yeah, so I do this fun write-up on my blog, year in review, and this data is driven by an Excel spreadsheet I put together, which categorizes all my flights and hotels, et cetera, et cetera. So if you like data, it's kind of fun for all of us to crunch those numbers. Yeah, so the last several years, it's worked out to be about 90 days in Bangkok, 60 days in Boston, where I grew up, and about 30 days in Chicago, where I own a place. I do 2 visits to the US, one Thanksgiving, Christmas visit, and then another visit in the summer. I sporadically stay in Thailand as kind of my base, and then I add in 6 months of travel, visiting new countries and visiting a lot of oldies but goodies.
Fantastic. And talk a little bit about, Omar, our guest from Singapore last week, she said that blogging seems to be the only profession in the world where you can pry into how somebody makes their money and how much they make. So we won't get into how much you make, but in terms of your different business ventures, you've got podcasting, blogging, tours, I think some real estate. What can you share about how you facilitate this travel forward lifestyle?
Yeah, so I have 2 businesses. One is real estate investing in Chicago, and the other is travel content. The reality is I make 97% of my income from my real world business of real estate. So that supports me. The blogging, which I started in 2014, has over the years been more professionalized. When I first started, I didn't know what I was doing. I invested only a couple of $100s to get it started. But over time, I've invested more and more time and money into that business. I do earn money from the blogging, but the reality is it's more of a trade and service or trade and product. So for instance, I've been working with G Adventures the last 2 years. G Adventures has sent me on 3 trips where I'm not paying for those trips. And in return, I provide them content. A new client this past year is a well-known name to us in the community, is Untamed Borders. So Untamed Borders brought me to Afghanistan. And again, in return, I am providing content to them.
So there's always the question about the person who wants to get into this area, and the advice is always some form of follow your passion, which often seems like a bad idea. I was just reading a book about following your passion is a good way to, like the bank loan officers are like, do not loan to anyone who says they're following their passion. And others are like, just pick a niche or do this and that. It seems hard to get concrete, actionable advice because it's hard to give concrete, actionable advice for so many situations. But I'm sure many people contact you. What are some of the tips you give? Again, it's not your primary business, but it's a business that enables a lot for you.
Yeah, and also I'm in the community, so I know tons of the truly professional bloggers in the community as well. And I guess everything I'm going to share with you is what I would share to you pre-COVID. And the reality is, I don't know what this world is going to look like 3 months or 6 months out. This insights or advice really might not mean anything. So, there's a cottage industry in the travel blogging community. And there's a number of bloggers who are promoting their ebooks or e-courses. Quit your job, travel the world for free, become a travel blogger. And this is at some level a little bit of snake oil. So I have a friend, a prominent blogger. It's called Dave's Travel Corner. And on his blog, he has something like 10,000 links to travel bloggers. Once a year, he checks these links, and he has to delete on any given year 20 or 30% of them, because either their links are dead or the bloggers have not created any new content for 3 or 6 months. They're out of the game. So what I'm getting at is it's a tough road. I mean, you are running a business, and you'll hear from the bloggers, they spend more hours developing their travel blog business than they ever did on their quote unquote real job before. So my advice to anybody starting off is don't quit your day job, start up your travel blog. And if in a year or two, you've figured out a path to monetization and you've saved up money for a cushion, and then you want to take the plunge, that seems a lot more reasonable. But I know many people who save money for 4 months, quit their job, and after 4 months, they've run out of their money, they've run out of their nest egg, but they've only earned $200 off their travel blog, and then they have to quote unquote go home and get a real job again.
And even the success stories, I think it can be very deceptive how maybe more in the financial blogger world, they share these revenue reports, which, well, it sounds great, 6-figure revenue, but if you've spent $99,000 to get Facebook ads to get $1,000 of revenue, that's not exactly a sustainable business for many people, and they're leaving out the cost and the bottom line in a lot of these things. Which it can make it sound so easy, and I understand why people do it for the marketing, but it does give a deceptive thing. It seems to me that the only way to somewhat quickly make money in travel blogging is to somehow get yourself, which can be extremely hard, but get yourself on the top or near top of the results of how to be a travel blogger, and then sell Bluehost affiliate hosting, and the top 10 answers to your questions are set up a blog with Bluehost and click here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for the lucky few. I mean, I know this guy, a digital nomad, who basically wrote a book, How to Become a Millionaire, but he didn't have a SIM card. So the only way this guy was going to become a millionaire is if people bought his book on how to become a millionaire. But yet he was living, a pretty low-key life.
Oh, goodness. We have George of Travel Blogger Buzz. So you have been picked up by the Points Travelers, George's efforts to spread your photos. I've had you speak at some conferences. Talk about the what you think of the Points Travelers and how you compare them to the Country Collectors.
Well, I consider myself sort of a rookie points guy. I mean, I do a couple turns a year for credit cards, but I always say, if, from a scale of 1 to 10, I've seen you speak. I mean, you are like a PhD in points hacking. You're the 10 of the community. I'm like a 4. So I'm okay. But I mean, to get from 4 to 10, it seems like hours and hours and hours of work. And I just don't want to dedicate that time. But I mean, I admire the points community so much. I'm in what's it called, FBZ. I'm in the Brandon group on Facebook. I love seeing that. And I forget his name. Who's the guy in Minnesota who gets like 5 million points a year?
Graz?
Is it Jeff?
You've got Jeff and you've got Mike Graziano there.
Yeah, Jeff. So I spoke with Jeff, and I mean, it's like talking to a Nobel, economics winner of point hacking.
You say I'm a 10. There needs to be 10 more levels for guys like Jeff and Graz. Graz even has a unicorn logo emblazoned on the inside of his sports coat, and Jeff is more quiet and probably even more deadly in terms of the points generation.
So, in short, I've got big respect for the points community, and wish I was picking up a couple 100,000 more a year myself.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. A lot of the characters in the points community do a lot of stuff in person, and so yeah, it's a tough ethical thing. If you're normal, it's almost for some it's their full business, and their full business is going to 30 Walmarts in a day and doing these intensive things, and it's what's socially responsible right now. And that's one thing when it's your hobby. It's another thing when it's your business. Talk about the beginner podcasting. I think in your episodes you do a lot of comments about the ups and downs, the recording sessions where you have to record for 6 hours to get one because of technical difficulties. All of that. It's easy as a listener to push play. It's quite hard, I think, as somebody. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I've still never started. I've started pushing record on this because the format seems easy, but I know that podcasting's a whole nother level of involvement.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of trials and tribulations over the last several years hosting Counting Countries, and the bane of my existence, which sends chills down my back, is whether the recording is going to work. So for the first half of my podcast career, I was using Skype and an app called Pamela. And then the last couple of years, I've been using a website called Zencaster, which I've been recording on that. But in short, it's a rolling of the die. On any given episode, I'm going to lose the recording. And I can tell you, Stefan, there's no worse feeling than losing that audio file. And there's been poor guests of mine where, we've had it, we've recorded an hour and 45-minute episode. And at the end of the call, I'm near tears and I'm like, listen, the audio file's gone. I can't do it again right now. My spirit's been beaten, but I'm going to be back in a week or a month and we're going to do it again. 1,000 apologies. So.
And it's gone because of connectivity issues, device failures. What kind of stuff happens?
Yeah. Like you said, I want it to be as simple as pressing a button and being 100% fail safe. But yeah, the connections get lost, the files do not load up, and yeah, it's gone.
And what's your kit? I believe you have two sets, one for on the road, portable, and then one a little bit more involved.
My kit is really simple. I mean, as many of you know, creating content is so simple today. My kit really is my laptop and one Yeti microphone. That's about $100. I only record podcasts either in Bangkok, Chicago, or Boston. So I don't do recordings on the road. I think it's too difficult. So I have one mic in Bangkok and another mic in the US. That's really my hardware stuff for the kit.
And talk about the mechanics of listing on Apple Podcasts, Google, all these different services. What are the mechanics of like that? Do you outsource any of the work?
Yeah, so the basic gist is you have to create an audio file. Then you got to get that audio file to all the different players. The different players are Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Alexa, Spotify. So there's a number, in essence, of hosting companies. I think the best well-known hosting company is called Libsyn. They have about a 10% market share. So you need to get your audio file to Libsyn, and then all the podcast players call upon the database and grab the audio file out of that.
And do you outsource any of the editing, or you do everything yourself?
Yeah, I am working with a guy called Ivo Terra. Some might know his voice because he does the little intro over the very cool music to the podcast. So that's Ivo. And, a lot of life is serendipity. And when I started Counting Countries, I didn't know anything about podcasting. And my friend Ivo was living in Bangkok, and I had lunch with him because I wanted to pick his brain. Evo actually wrote Podcasting for Dummies. So spoke with Evo and I'm like, listen, I want you to refer me to someone in the community who can take my file and get it to Libsyn and do all this back end work that I don't want to learn about. So we have, she's like, Eva's like, let me think about that. Let me get back to you and I'll come up with a name. And a couple of days later, he emails me. He's like, oh, I just started a podcast production business. Do you want to be the first client? So I've been working with Evo for 5 years on the production of Counting Countries. So I was very lucky to be friends with him.
Oh, fantastic. And you have a Patreon. Talk about that for content creators, the pros and cons, success with it.
Yeah, I think, as you said earlier, what's the path of monetization for content? And there's 1,000 different roads to monetization, whether it's a video, whether it's a blog, whether it's a podcast. In general, my experience is none are easy and none are overly lucrative. So I spend some money and definitely a lot of time in the production of the podcast. So there's a platform called Patreon. Patreon is for any type of content creator, whether you're making a video, a podcast, or anything under the sun. And fans of that content can become financial supporters of that content. So basically, what I've done for my patrons of Counting Countries is they get extra content. So I have this awesome podcast coming out on the second Thursday of May that I'm really excited about with Francis Tappan. This is going to be really fascinating. It's about a 3-hour interview because I couldn't stop talking to him. But what I did is I edited out 30 minutes of that podcast, and that 30 minutes is only available to the patrons.
Oh boy. And for those that haven't heard of Francis and his travels, give a teaser for that.
Yeah, I could give a 5-minute teaser, but I'll narrow it down to 2 data points. One, he spent 5 years on the African continent, never leaving. He bought a truck and visited all of the continental countries by truck over 5 years, and then went to the islands as well, but not with the truck. The second thing is Francis has climbed the highest peak in 51 of the 54 African countries. So we all talk about chasing 193 or TCC. A couple of us are doing the 7 summits, but there's even a smaller community of people who are chasing the 54 peaks of Africa. So this guy is unbelievably fascinating. So I think it's in 2 Thursdays, you'll hear that podcast.
I think I did. I heard an interview with him talking about some of those. I mean, some of these peaks are not necessarily, awe-inspiring. Some are, of course, and then some are not necessarily the biggest, but they can be incredibly difficult because you might encounter security officials or different things of wondering why you're trying to get to this unmarked hill in the middle of what might be incidentally a sensitive area or something. I'm just looking through. I'm trying to figure out how to get the link to your Patreon in the. I hear on your page about the podcast episodes. You're thanking the Patreons. Where can I put the link in quickly? Where do I find it? Not making it easy. So that's the blogging tip of the day. Help Stefan find your Patreon faster.
You can see I'm not that good at.
We'll have to add it to the contents in the end if I don't find it. So he's got the ability to become his patron, his Patreon patron. We just have to locate it, and my internet is slowing down as well. So I think we're going to send it out in a twist on how we came in. We all want to see you on camera doing your classic "Hey now." in the Rick way with the full face, everything, and that'll be our sign off for the evening.
Okay, well, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everybody. And hey now.